My presentation is on podcasting for teaching and research in history, and it's called a case study. But in this presentation, I want to emphasize that I'm talking about how educators can create content for themselves and for their students, not just use podcasts that are already out there in the world, although that is a fascinating subject as well. But that's not the subject of this presentation. Got a little curtain going there. Now, what is podcasting in terms of education, in education language? Well, podcasting, if you're not familiar with it, involves pushing content to the listener, in this case, students, that is always available, whether the students are online or offline. And so students tend to live more and more on their mobile phones. And so podcasts can reside on their mobile phones and automatically download to them so that they can listen to them whether or not they're online. Once they're downloaded, they can be offline and listen to them just fine. So it's sort of like a classroom that they can dive into when they want, anytime. We hear something called imposter syndrome. I don't know if you've ever heard of that, where students think that they're in college under false pretenses. They're not really able to handle it. They're not good enough. Well, at least with podcasts, students can find the setting in which education takes place comfortable because they're used to working with the internet. Now, this is not a comprehensive overview of scholarly opinion on podcasts. I say it's changed from denial to acceptance in the last 10 or 12 years. But there hasn't been that much written and not much study either. But in 2015, you see those first three scholars at the top, they did not think highly of podcasts in education. They said podcasts resulted in little increase in performance, little increase in learning gains in a large introductory course. Well, of course, that's one type of setting and not the only one. But Thomas Goldman had a sort of mixed view. He said that sometimes podcasts in courses encourage students to skip class, and that's a bad thing, of course. But he praised podcasting as an add-on to the classroom experience, not a replacement of lectures or other types of curricula. And then Danielle Vandenberg, who is an English teacher, she really likes podcasts in education. She believes that close listening of good podcasts reveal the importance of logical and coherent thinking processes and structuring an argument, and provides insights that assist in analyzing text. So who knows where podcasting is going to go as far as scholars are concerned, but there's some early opinion. Now, in my opinion, podcasts reduce cognitive overload. And I'm not the only person to say this. But because podcasts tend to be short form, and a podcast, by the way, I don't know how familiar you are with podcasts and podcasting. Moderately, very, or very little. I really appreciate that. So again, I'll go really quickly through these because we already talked about them. Podcasting obviously is something students are used to. And by the way, at the end of this presentation, you're going to have a link to a video that I made of this presentation yesterday. It's actually, it's 9 minutes and 20 seconds. So if you want to see something over again, sort of like a podcast, you can go back and fast forward and so on. So these are the, and in fact, there's a PDF of this already in the conference, at the conference website that you can download. So we talked about that too. And this is where we were at. You can see that slide that says at the top, podcasts reduce cognitive overload. Okay. Yeah, they tend to be brief, 10 to 15, 20 minutes at the most. And so students can fast forward to places where they may have missed or they can listen over again if they misunderstand something or want to get a reinforcement on something. Podcasting may promote metacognition because, in a podcast episode, you have a theme, a thesis, and then an argument, and then a summing up. Now, you have the same thing in a lecture that's 50 minutes or 75 minutes, but it could meander for a long time in that scope in a lecture. But in a podcast, there's less to analyze. You can see the framework better, at least it seems to me. And even the scholarly skeptics tend to allow that podcasting might work in a flipped environment, flipped classroom environment. Okay. Now, here's how I use it in my course. I teach a history survey course in Western Civ. It goes from 1648 to the present. And you can see the outline of the course. You can just scan that, and you can instantly see that each unit covers a vast span of time. It's incredibly broad, highly conceptual. And I find that students don't really do conceptual. They don't think conceptually, not at least not the students that I teach. I mean, I teach at a public college, which has open access. It's not restrictive in any way. So students are not used to thinking conceptually. Well, if you give them an essay question on one of these units for the entire unit, they may be overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Now, what I do is I replace the podcasts with lectures for each unit. So for that first unit, The Age of Absolutism and Enlightenment, which covers more than a century,
Yeah.
I give them a 10-minute to 15-minute podcast that provides an overview of the period. And then the other four, sorry about the typo, that should be episode 5 at the bottom. But the other four track back to the first one in the sense that it shows how each of these subtopics reflects the overarching themes of the Age of Absolutism. And because each of these subtopic episodes are relatively short and also are targeted to a specific topic, I think it's easier for students to grasp. Mm-hmm. Over and above the fact that they can listen to them again. So, here's a question at the bottom here. You can just look at the bottom on this scientific revolution. Explain the differences and similarities between the ideas of Copernicus, Galileo, and Newton during the Age of Absolutism. Well, that question is actually answered in the podcast episode. Now, it's not answered in 1 or 2 sentences, because that would be, giving them, that would be teaching to the test, that would be too easy. But over the course of the episode, it's clear what the similarities and differences are. And I make that clear, but not in 1 or 2 sentences, because I don't want them to just listen to 1 or 2 sentences. All right, now let's look at some statistics. And these statistics are very general, very impressionistic. Further research is definitely going to be necessary. But here's what I did. I compared student learning outcome assessment data from 2 courses. One course was a U.S. history survey that did not have podcasts in it. And the other course was this Western Civ course that did. And in both cases, I surveyed students' performance in 2 different sections. That is 2 sections for U.S. history, 2 sections for Western Civ. And I looked at 2 assessments for Western Civ and 3 for U.S. history survey. And the Western Civ assessments just happened to be higher level questions requiring some narrative analysis on the part of the students about cause and effect relationships in history or analyzing primary sources. 2 of the U.S. survey student learning outcome assessments were multiple choice, and they just measured factual knowledge. So comparing those two assessments with the Western Civ assessments is like comparing apples to oranges. However, there was one US survey assessment of student learning that was apples to apples, and that required them to analyze primary sources like they did up here. So here you see the results. And again, this is just impressionistic data because the sample size is so small. But the first three columns are for the US history survey, in which podcasts were not used. And the blue rows are for the Western Civ course. So you can see the students did very well on the multiple choice. I have no idea. This is the success rate of students meeting the target, which was 10 to 15 questions in the multiple choice exam correctly. I have no way of knowing even if the test somehow got out, which would help explain these high numbers. But I want to focus on this third row because analyzing primary sources is apples to apples here in the two different classes. So in the US history survey, you have 6 out of 9 correct. And that's the target, 66% or higher. And 75% of the students met the target. But in this row for Western Civ, we see a more rigorous target, 70%, slightly more rigorous, but a higher success rate. Now, that may not have anything to do with podcasting, but it's interesting that that's the one big difference between the two courses. It's not a huge difference, but it is interesting that, and I also had the same success rate for the other higher learning assessment, analyzing cause and effect relationships with an essay. The only other difference, which I thought was kind of interesting, is that here we have what I call attrition rates. 5 students skipped the assignment altogether in US history for all 3, and 48 took it. So students seem to persist better in the US history class. Here you have a smaller number of students who took the exam, a larger number of students who skipped it, but probably because, or possibly because they weren't in the course anymore. And so maybe this podcasting affects persistence negatively. I don't know. It's just an impression. We'll have to see with other research. In terms of polls, and by the way, I'm aware that I've exceeded 15 minutes. I did, we had all that snafu. So give me a couple minutes more if you don't mind. Okay. Yeah. Surveys, this survey was taken of the US history students. They had no podcasts in the course. 86% said they had listened, 86% said that they had listened to one podcast. It's going backwards. Okay. Let's see. Let me go back. I'm sorry.
No problem.
They had listened to one podcast at one point in their lives, at least one. 98% said they would prefer a 15-minute podcast to a 15-minute lecture. Why? I don't know. It could be good reasons or bad. And would you rather write a longer essay on one question covering the topic of the entire unit or 5 short answer questions? 87.7% said they would prefer completing 5 assignments. Okay, now I'm not going to spend much time on this slide, but you can look at it yourself. But all right, I'm not going to go back. I'm just going to explain what's on that slide. That slide says it's very easy to create your own podcast. Here's what you do. You can download an app to your smartphone, which records your voice on your smartphone. Hit the red button, talk, hit the red button again, it creates a file. Okay, you can then put software on your computer called Audacity, which is a free software, open source, and you can lightly edit the file to take out the ums and the gaps. And then you purchase a service from a podcasting hosting service like Blueberry. It's actually spelled BLUBRRY, blueberry.com. And they will give you 150 megabytes of storage space per month for $12 a month. That's the only cost factor in the whole process. And that's about 15, that's about 5 15-minute episodes per month. And then you simply, well, one more thing about that. Blueberry also gives you at no extra charge a website to publish your podcasts on and to provide descriptions. And they provide a subscription functionality, so you can simply send your podcast to Apple Podcasts and the whole world can subscribe to it. And you're in business. You're in business. So on this slide, I'm going to click here, and you can, maybe you can see, can you see this open website or not?
Yeah.
Oh, okay. So this is a picture of Benjamin Franklin I got from the Library of Congress, so it's copyright ready. And then I have a little description of the podcast, and then if you click here, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Believed in something called enlightened despotism, which is to say, okay, so you see it starts immediately, and this is the learning curve for students, which is 0. I mean, if they can find a way to open a website and click on this link, they can listen to podcasts. They don't have to subscribe to it. Let me pull this down. And so the student learning curve is 0 because students just click on a link. You can invite them to subscribe, but they don't have to. Subscription would give them these episodes downloaded automatically to their phone. It costs students nothing, and I do supplement the episodes with an OER textbook. Let me get out of here. Okay, and this is the last slide. You know, the bottom line is, if podcasting is not useful to student learning, it's not because it is expensive or difficult to deploy. And we have not tried or studied it to an extent where its pedagogical value can be dismissed. So as you can guess from this presentation, my recommendation is to try it. All right, thank you for listening.